My name is Scott Allison. I would like to welcome you to the 14th in the series of programs about Narcotics Anonymous, a self-help group for drug addicts seeking recovery with meetings all over the United States. Our panel members tonight are recovering drug addicts who have been drug-free in Narcotics Anonymous for at least 4 years. I'm a therapist with almost 10 years' experience in the field of addiction. It's been my observation that drug-addicted people who are actively involved in Narcotics Anonymous have a much better chance of recovery, almost 10 times the recovery rate of addicts who do not become involved in this program. Before we begin tonight, the NA members here with me have asked that I make it very clear that they are not spokesmen for Narcotics Anonymous. They share their own personal experience, strength, and hope, and are not speaking for NA as a whole. Narcotics Anonymous is an anonymous program, and for that reason you will see only the shadows of the NA members, and we will use only first names. Tonight we're going to take a look at the publication of the book Narcotics Anonymous. I think you're going to find this a fascinating story. This has been one of the shows that I've been really looking forward to doing. Before we do that, though, as has been our custom, I'd like to give our NA guests an opportunity to introduce themselves, share a little of their own personal history with us. And before we do that, I'd like to remind you once again that the opinions expressed here are those of the individual NA members and not those of NA as a whole. I'm going to begin tonight by asking our NA members to introduce themselves.
My name's Greg. I'm an addict.
My name's Bo, and I'm an addict.
My name's Paige, and I'm an addict.
Great. Greg, would you like to just share very briefly?
I sure will. I came to a program of Narcotics Anonymous a little over 13 years ago now. I'd been using drugs since I was a child on a daily basis, and had gotten to the point where I could no longer use successfully. I just couldn't go on anymore, and I found Narcotics Anonymous in 1970, as I said, and my life's changed since then. And a good part of that time's been involved in an effort to get the book that you mentioned from inception to actually having a copy in hand.
Thank you. Bo?
Well, I grew up around here, and there was a beatnik bust in the 50s, and I went with a friend of mine down, and we shook hands and introduced ourselves and became beatniks. And I got into the hippie thing and into acid and into crystal, and we were going along great until my friend started dying. And that was hard to rationalize. And I had come across the name Narcotics Anonymous in a book called The Beats. And I first sought help in NA in 71. We struggled to get a copy of the white booklet, held a few meetings. They failed. 3 years later, in 1974, I got clean. I've been clean since then. And I'm just grateful to be here tonight. One of the things, though, is that first meeting in 71 died for lack of literature. And that made a big difference in my attitude towards our lack of a basic text later on.
Thank you, Bo. Paige?
Well, I guess I could say that I started using drugs in 1971 when I was just starting in high school, and I used drugs for about 8 years. And during that time, they helped to totally devastate my life. And I got clean in 1979 in a local rehabilitation center, and that's where I found about Narcotics Anonymous, found out about the program, and I've been able to stay clean with the help of the program and the people ever since then, without ever having to use drugs again.
Thank you, Paige. I'd like to get right to this book. Some of the things that I have heard about it, where it began, how it finally got to the form that we have laying on the table. It's a really interesting story. I think that it's probably safe to say that there has never been a book written quite like this one, nor written in the same way that this one was written. I'd like to start with Greg.
My name's Greg, and I'm an addict, and I kind of like to give a little bit of the background information. kind of led up to the production of this book. Narcotics Anonymous, as we know it, although there are some mentions of similar fellowships prior to that, started in 1953 in California. And the first publication coming out of there was this little book over here, which was published in the late 50s. And, I don't know how many pages, it's just a few pages. In the 60s, the second book here came out, which had some, originally didn't have stories, but then had some personal stories in it and had some text in it. The 70s was followed by the next one. And in the 80s, everything beyond that comes out of the 80s. So it's been really accelerated. I can remember when I first got involved in NA at a level other than just hanging around. When I really started trying to help, really started to be a part of and contribute my share of as far as doing some of the work. We were talking about literature a lot. We had this little pamphlet, and that was it. That's all there was. In 1971 or 2, we were talking a lot about a book. The ideas came that maybe a couple of people or one individual or 2 or 3 individuals should get together and just write a book and get it out. The decision was made at that time that a book for Narcotics Anonymous shouldn't be written by 1 or 2 members, but rather it should be written by the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous, by the hundreds and thousands of different people, who make Narcotics Anonymous what it is. And in February of '72, a letter went out asking for input for a book. And there really was little or none forthcoming. There was enough so we could move from here to here and add a couple of stories and personal stories and make a little bit of progress. But there certainly wasn't any kind of input at that time that would really be the basis of a text. In the later 70s, from 75, 76, 77, 78, we started to get some input. We started to get some writing on the steps and traditions. We started getting writing on the service structure. We started getting some of the little public information pamphlets that we have in some of our meetings. We started getting a few people involved in the mid-70s. And that's pretty much the background. The need has always been known that we needed something that someone could lay their hands on and be able to translate what has always been almost an oral tradition into something more tangible where people could find recovery even if they didn't have a group of members that they were in close contact with. Books in libraries, books available at our institutions, books available all over the place. This has been a need that's been recognized for a long time, and a source book for members. Until the late 70s, it was pretty sputtery. Little bits and pieces here and there, and no coordinated effort. There was a committee for literature that every time one of us, I was part of that committee, every time one of us would be talking to somebody, we'd say, hey, how about writing down your experiences or your story and sending it in? And every once in a while somebody would. And it started to mount up just a little bit. And the effort to write the book, per se, dates from 77 or 78, right around there.
So NA came into being in 1953, about. So for about 25 years, until, well, 76, 77, 24 years, what essentially you folks did was an oral tradition in terms of sharing your experience with one another. Aside from these
Well, when I came around the program, they used to call this a hip pocket program, and everybody was told was to carry one of these in their hip pocket wherever you went. So, and read it. And, but yes, it was. You learned about this program in the meetings and from other members through word of mouth as much as anywhere else. The little pamphlet certainly helped me. But it was almost like an outline, a bare bones outline. A lot of good elements in there. In fact, I still believe most of what, is needed for recovery exists in that little pamphlet, but in such a skeletal form, without any meat, without anything but the bare bones, that it often raised more questions than it helped answer. And those questions you got the answers to on a one-to-one and in meetings. And that was pretty much how it was. A lot of emphasis on spending a lot of time with people and asking for help. There wasn't a reference you could go to get answers to your questions about how do I stay clean today, about how do I work this step, about what do I do next. There really wasn't a reference to go to. And that's changed, thank God.
So by 72, you had formed a committee to begin the process of writing this book.
Yeah, the push in the 1960s was the white pamphlet. Literature-wise, there were a lot of other projects. A lot of people have asked, like you said, 25, how come it took 25 years to get around to writing a book? There were a lot of other things that needed to be done. There was getting the fellowship from a point where it was one group, just a handful of people, to the point where there were several hundred members. And in the mid-70s, thousands. And the movement of the fellowship from a small local community outward to where it really became a nationwide and a worldwide fellowship. And that's where the emphasis was placed, I think, rather than on the literature per se.
So about 74, Bo comes along.
Well, my name's Bo and I'm an addict.
Hey, Bo.
I'm just praying for the Spirit to use as an instrument tonight, and if I say anything foolish, I hope God will be forgetting, graceful about it. Well, along with my acid, my crystal, and the other things, I come from a reasonably nice family, and I managed a few years at Georgia State, and an English major taught me how to write a theme, English professor, and a lot of my addiction started with on the active part, it started with cramming for exams with speed, and a motorcycle wreck, no more college, a lot more dope, and the bitter end. So I laid back. I just tried to stay close to the ground as I could, work my steps, keep it simple, avoid the any kind of noisiness or busyness for my first 3 years clean. But I'd been real close before I got to the program. In the early 70s, I'd been real close to the people dying in the streets and the people trying to help the people dying in the streets. And, MACAD and Human Improvement Project, and a lot of the things that were done in the early 70s to try to help the people on the Strip here. And one thing that I learned was with City Hall and the APD and everybody was there was no hope for the addict. You could spend money, you could hope and pray, jump up and down. There just wasn't much that could be done. And, you know, anyway, 3 years clean, and with the reality, the promise of NA inside of me, I got so scratchy and upset about our lack of a book that I went to the World Convention in San Francisco and asked who was working on it, and got introduced eventually to this person to my left. And you know, he was very warm and supportive and friendly, and it was okay. And the commonplace thing in those days was addicts can't write. Addicts in recovery can't write. And World Services is waiting on the fellowship to write it, and the fellowship's waiting on World Services to write it. And I mean, in my situation, I could see the dilemma. There was a stalemate, and it would go on. And the meetings were growing, and people were obviously staying clean, and it became just something inside of me. I couldn't stand it, and yet none of us stand alone. And I tried to break the ice in some small ways in writing, and between one thing and another, we had a literature conference in Wichita in '78, and for the first time we had a group of members gathered from all over the fellowship at an announced conference to work towards a basic text. And that conference resulted in, we had a lot of trouble doing the minutes, so shake it out. We did this. That's the result of that conference. And then that was the work guide, the study guide, to organize thousands of NA members all over the world in the effort towards a basic text. And we just had to pray a lot and just discover, you know, some of the literary mechanics, but it was all volunteer members. There was a lot of spirit, a lot of warmth, enthusiasm, and a lot of people to pick you up if you stumble. And a year later at Lincoln, Nebraska, there was another literature conference held, and by that time there had been quite a bit. This let the fellowship know we were serious, that there was a serious effort going on, and by the time we got to Lincoln, there was 800 pages of material collected.
This was from various people throughout Narcotics Anonymous.
Oh, yeah, just all over. The first thing we did, being from a small community, was send a letter out to all the other small communities, and the small communities were really responsive. And attended that conference at Wichita, the one at Lincoln. And so at Lincoln, we made a topic outline, and we took the raw material and pegged it into the slots on the topic outline and cut and pasted those items on pieces of paper and tried to write bridge sentences and work it up. And 6 months after that, we held another conference in Memphis, Tennessee, and the plan to get this job done at home by the local lit committees was a failure. But a lot of people were at Memphis, about 75 members from a bunch of states, and the dream became a reality. And you could see the chapters taking form. And there was 2 photocopiers and 5 or 6 electrics, and just a bunch of loving, caring addicts working together. One chapter was taken over the telephone. It was read into a receiver in Oregon and typed by a girl in Memphis. And some idiot held the phone to her ear for 8 hours. And she typed a whole chapter. It took 8 hours long distance because we had to move fast. It was sort of a miracle. And, you know, you got to be grateful for what God gives you. And not look back, you know, look ahead. keep it positive, keep the momentum. And midweek, one of the members made an estimate that if we got a reasonably rough draft together with stories, that it would cost $6,000 to print it, and we were all in contact with our local areas and put out the word fellowship-wide, and I think they raised about $20,000 in not too long a time. And 30 days later, this had been typed and had been attempted on a volunteer basis, and finally we had to hire some real typists to type it with the little page lines. It's a review form for changes and input from the whole fellowship, and a copy had been mailed to every group in the world was located, and a copy printed and mailed to those groups of this. To every group in the world. We located them and mailed it to them off the money sent in, and free to every group in the world. The donations were a separate thing within the fellowship only, no outside donations. And the spirit was high, and enthusiasm was just great, and everything was supportive. And you know, God just made a miracle. After that, you didn't hear Addicts in Recovery Can't Write anymore.
I should think not.
And it was extremely difficult to get from here to here. And because there was input on this, and there were conferences held 2 months, every 2 months, there were this conference was 9 days long, 24 hours a day. We never stopped. And we didn't wait for Federal Express. We had it shipped in by Delta. Go out and pick out the material at like a human being at the airline, except for that one chapter over the telephone. But you know, we could tell something miraculous was taking place, and you don't fool around. And every 2 months or so, there was another literature conference until the work was done. It took 1 year. We would have kept at it if it had taken 2 or 3. But that resulted in this. And maybe it'd be best to, you know, let my brother here say something about that.
Before you do that, though, this went from quite a large document to something that I could roll up and put in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is as a result of sending this thing to every NA group you could find and asking them to review it and make suggestions and that sort of thing.
And I'm talking about Calcutta, Barcelona, Frankfurt, London, and all in Australia. The Australians contributed material to the basic text from Sydney and Melbourne.
Paige, you?
My name's Paige. I'm an addict.
Page.
I'm real glad to have the opportunity to be here tonight. Well, we went into Memphis, where this copyright, this great copy came out of, with, you know, the idea that we were going to have a book. And like Bo was saying, he was organizing and coordinating that operation. And we did whatever we had to do to come up with that, and that is that's the basic text part and the stories in there. And when we sent that out for review, we asked that people read it and see what you thought of it and input to it. Okay, so how that came from gray to white was that we gathered the input. We took everything that we had and we put it together and made that gray book. And then that had, you know, alleviated one pile. And then we started collecting new data and input. And as it came in, we put it together with the gray book, and we came up with the white book, which is an improved, condensed version. Now, another thing, this is just the text portion here. That's not the stories.
Okay.
And that took 2 conferences. We had a conference in Ohio and in Florida. And both of them were 7-day conferences. And at the end of, well, they both ran over. but at the end of the conference in Miami, we had completed the what we called the approval form, which was we took all the input and we reviewed it and compiled it, did the best we could, and put it together in a good, legible form that flowed, and approved it as a literature committee, which at that time, that year, consisted of 300 active members. That is to say, members who attended conferences. That does not include the people who helped, with sent writing in, working at home and stuff. And so 300 members approved that white book. So that year we had a little mini conference like thing in Memphis. Well, actually, one member took care of the printing, and we put that together and bound it in that form right there, and sent it out for approval to the fellowship. And along with that, we held one more conference in Philadelphia to put together a story section that would go along with the text part, and that's this right here.
And these are then just the stories of individual NA members.
Right.
Okay.
Members' experience. And we sent that out for approval also. So at that time, what took place is the fellowship then read the book, and it wasn't unanimous, but it wasn't unanimous, but it was the majority of the fellowship agreed to approve the white book as written, as our basic text, and some 27 of the 40 stories in there were approved, or 40 of the 45, and which later, due to people moving and getting lost and whatnot, it dwindled down to 27. And so in May of last year, of 82, we had a book, but it was just in that form
Just
right
like
there.
this.
And for a bunch of dope addicts to get together and try to write a book is, something to begin with, but then to get it together and then write it and try to bind it and sell it and organize it and do all that kind of thing presented another problem.
Well, how did it get from this to these hardbound copies?
Well, once it was approved, it had to go be retypeset again and laid out for hardback form, and we have a World Service office in Sun Valley, California, which takes care of all our printing and distribution of our literature, and we laid it on them. Of course, what we didn't consider is the World Service office had been used to producing
Printing
pamphlets,
back.
and we gave them a book, and we asked them to have it done in 5 months, which is just an impossible task. They came out 11 months, almost 12 months later, with this red book right here, red and blue, which was our first edition.
Greg, you said something when you began that you felt like one or two people shouldn't write this book, that it should be a product of everybody in NA. That strikes me as a monumental undertaking, and from what you three have shared so far, it sure sounds like it. But why couldn't one or two people just have written this book?
Well, certainly one or two people could write a book.
Okay.
I mean, people do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been very expedient and probably a whole lot easier. But we felt that since this program is so personal in nature, that it's based on living experiences, that it's based on the experiences of each member of Narcotics Anonymous. Narcotics Anonymous is a reflection of all its parts. And in order to get the broadest spectrum possible of experience in recovery from drug addiction, we felt that the book had to come from many, many sources, that no one should be excluded from development of these concepts, because to leave out something that was meaningful to someone might cost a life down the road. It was important enough where we needed the broad cross-section of all different kinds of addicts. NA is made up of all different kinds of people, from rich to poor, from educated to uneducated, the whole spectrum of people. And that needed to be in our book. That needed to be our book. It needed to be our shared experience. And a lot of things were in the book at various phases that got edited out because they weren't common experience. They weren't a shared experience. They were experience of maybe one or two people in their own particular area, in their own particular approach, but they weren't common to the fellowship as a whole. That's one of the things we were looking for. I could write a book, you could write a book, a lot of people could write a book, but that would be one person's experience. And we found out in NA, painfully, that what works for one individual might not work for another individual. A member of NA can't do exactly as I do, other than not use drugs, and grow the same way I've grown. I mean, another person will approach it a different way. What the steps mean to me may be slightly different than what they mean to Paige or Bo. But we each have our own personal program based on these spiritual principles. But there are some things that we share. There are many, many things that we share, and that's what's in the book. The experience of the fellowship and not just one member. And we felt very strongly about that all the way through the work. This should be the shared experience of Narcotics Anonymous, not the experience of one member of Narcotics Anonymous or two members of Narcotics Anonymous.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were one of the people involved in this mammoth telephone call.
Yeah.
Bo, did you ever at any time just want to throw up your hands and walk away from it?
No way, Jose.
Yeah.
The instant it became conceivable that anything I might be able to contribute to it might result in the basic text of Narcotics Anonymous and life of people like us, then I became totally committed and totally willing.
I've heard another.
To the extent that in the beginning, you know, and there was just a dream and no way to say it was going to be successful, we ran hard enough to where if we fell on our face, we'd be heard. We figured somebody smarter than us, better than us, would come in and do a better job. You know?
Yeah, but I have heard people say that you particularly devoted your life for a couple of 3 years to getting this book out. That became...
Yeah, but it was a gentle, sweet thing. It wasn't, like a vicious obsession.
Okay.
It was very hard, but it was totally rewarding in terms of the spirit and the feeling. Don't forget the years I spent getting here and the people that died on me.
Yeah.
And one thing about dead folks, you can't bring them back. But if you got a chance to do something for the living, you go for it. That's what it was to me. It was life and death. And my little concerns, my little business, or any personal concerns were just, I'd have felt very guilty and embarrassed to put them ahead of something that could benefit so many.
Paige, how about you? You were really involved in this thing from, 79, 80 on?
Well, what happened to me, Bo and Greg didn't expound on it too much, but they both had the opportunity to found NA or be co-founders of NA in their areas and regions where they had gotten clean. And I kind of came in on their coattails. Like when Bo mentioned when he started off that he'd gotten in NA once and it failed, and he got in it again and it prospered. Well, I came in 5 years after Bo did the second time. And when I came into Narcotics Anonymous, there was a clubhouse not 3 miles from my house. There was 13 meetings a week. There was well over 100 members in my area. And it was just real easy for me to get clean. It was, the program worked, the support there was fantastic, and it was just great. And but I didn't get to experience the hardships or the pleasure or whatever that they got, the rewards that they got from you know, being in on the beginning of it. And when I came into the program, I got Bo as my sponsor, which is like having a big brother in a fraternity type thing. And he was so involved in the book that you know, naturally I became involved just through contact. And actually I started off, we have a local newsletter, and I got involved in that with about 6 months clean. And I was clean about a year and 2 months when I went to my first lit conference. And I had done a lot of drugs, a lot of different kind of drugs. I don't think there weren't many drugs that I didn't try when I was using, but the experience, the euphoria that I got from those 70 to 100 addicts working together for a common goal, a common good in Memphis was just overwhelming. It took me off my feet. It gave me something, I'm sure that devout Christians would describe it as a spiritual experience, like they saw Christ or something like that. Well, to me, that was, you know, what it did for me. And I realized then that you know, there really was something that I could work for and devote my time to that would help me and also help other people. And when we talk about going to great lengths to make sure that everyone was represented, that everyone had a say, you know, in this book and in these stories, that's, you know, that's completely true. I'd say that there's 10 chapters in the book, and each one of the chapters was rewritten. There were at least 5 drafts on each chapter at 3 different conferences. I mean, they were written and rewritten and rewritten, and we took, we were very painstaking in qualifying every sentence in that book, if you can believe that. There's not one sentence in the book that makes one flat statement about any one generalization. They're all qualified so that it might apply for 99% of the people in the fellowship, but it does not necessarily apply for 100%. And the same went for the stories. We tried to get, although we don't discriminate against religion or race or anything like that, we tried our best to get every possible type of story in that section. We tried for you know, marijuana addicts, heroin addicts, you know, housewives, the typical old lady prescription addict, in every conceivable form. And it was something else trying to do that. And we did pretty good at it. We got a pretty good cross section of addicts in the stories and in the book.
Paige, why was this, you're so concerned, all of you were so concerned about this book? As you said, it might apply to 99% of the people in the program, but 1% that it wouldn't apply to, that you're real careful about qualifications in those sentences. Why did you do that? But why?
Well, because the first step of Narcotics Anonymous is we admitted we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. So as qualified members of NA, we were very much in touch with our personal shortcomings. And it's sort of like you can fool some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. if you can get an idea or a way of putting a spiritual truth, if you can get 100 to agree on it, then it somehow got more currency, it's more valid. You know, there's less chance of it being self-will, run riot, or personal preference, you know, involved. And so that's what we were doing, is we were trying to filter out our personal shortcomings so it could do the greatest good for the most members. Did I say that well? Because, I mean, I know what I can come up with under my own steam. It's a mess.
Okay.
You know? But we were just lucky, and God was with us, and all these thousands of people did the work. And we were just sort of like stagehands. We just felt lucky, you know. And it's their book. They're the ones that got to live by it. They're the ones that got to give it to their newcomer and sort of stake their life on it, you know. So it better be right. So we just looked at it like we were checking out everything every way we could so that there would be a minimum of flaws. I mean, nothing that, you know, that passes through a man's hand is going to be perfect. We were just trying to filter out those flaws, and it's the way we do it in NA. It's the NA way. Surrender to group conscience and all. There were some things about the steps in our recovery program that affected the style and manner in which the work was developed and handled throughout conclusion. And,
So-
it's built in.
So what you attempted to do with this book, and having read it, it appears to me that you succeeded, is that if a person has the disease of addiction, no matter to what chemical or what circumstances, they can find recovery from that disease in this textbook.
That's right.
Is that?
Absolutely.
One thing I want to throw out with that is that, you know, I believe that's true. But another part of Narcotics Anonymous is the personal contact, is the mutual support system that our meetings and our friendships and our working together provides. I think the book is going to help a lot of people, but I don't think it replaces the need for one addict helping another. That doesn't replace the need for the self-help type movement that Narcotics Anonymous is. It's an adjunct to. It enhances it, doesn't replace it.
Do you think that at some point you will go back through this process, revise, update? Bo, do you think that that's...
Well, nice burn on that. That's I have to think back, you know, to the first moments when this dream began, and it was seen then that if there was a successful effort for basic text, that the first edition of it would likely be incomplete, because it would be the best that could be approved by the Hope Fellowship at that time, you know, whenever that was. It turns out to have been 82. And that 3 to 5 years later there would be a real second edition written by some of the people from the first edition and the people that had never known a fellowship without a book. People that had gotten clean with the book in their hands. Well, they would see the flaws. Well, they would know what needed to be there, of course. And that's sort of like a prayer and a hope with me today, in a sense. I mean, I'm willing to leave it in God's hands, you know. But I know that specifically we need a chapter for the, you know, the employment. We need another chapter for the relationship. Somewhat, there's more stuff comes to light, you know. We've grown quite a bit. And through growing and going to the meetings, then more is revealed. And I would pray that that would be an enduring form. I don't think it would be good to, you know, just keep messing with it every 5 years or something. But you know, that's certainly in God's hands. I'm a very tiny fellow, you know, we're all sort of pygmies in NA, so if anything happens, it's by group will or group conscience. But that was part of the original idea, and we'll see. You know, it's not today. Got to wait a few years now. And that's not bad either. You know, it gives you time for other things. NA needs a lot, like Greg's saying. And you know, you can't read the book without it saying go to a meeting, ask your sponsor. You know, that's where my absolutely came from. You could start a meeting probably with that book. I just went on my honeymoon for a week, and I missed the meeting, so I kept my nose in the book. It made me feel good. I didn't get loaded. That's miracles to a man like me.
Yeah. Are you, Paige, are you folks writing some more literature? Are you, I mean, beyond the book, are you in the process of producing more literature?
Oh yeah. Last year, the literature committee came up with 12 new pamphlets. Up until that time, we had 6 pamphlets and the white booklet, and then the book, and now 12 more pamphlets. I also submitted for review and approval last year that will go out to the fellowship this year was the first draft of an NA 12 by 12, which is a study of the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. Also a book written by the fellowship up north, a group effort by some people up there on kind of like this text we have here is another book, Living Clean, is 153 pages, I believe, a real good book. And all those will come out as, you know, additions to, you know, our literature.
Well, will they go through the same process? I mean, in terms of having to have everybody in Narcotics Anonymous that you can find look at it and provide input for it before you publish them?
Well, that's hard to say. When we were writing this book, since we started on this book and finished it, I'd say we've tripled in size. The pressing need to get this book out was due to our rapid growth. We had meetings and groups and things starting all over the United States and in Europe, everywhere. And we just couldn't, we didn't have anything for them. We'd write them a letter and send them what we had, but it wasn't any kind of substantial thing at all. So what we did is the white booklet was expanded. It's 10 chapters too. Was expanded into the book. And when Bo talked about some chapters that were left out, we just didn't have time. We had to get something out, something viable, something real, something good, and we had to get it out. We felt that we had to, and make it available to the people who wanted a book, who needed a book. They were begging us, please let us have something. We need something. And so that's why we got this out like we did. And I feel like the book will probably stand without too much change. It will probably have additions, but I believe it will basically stay the same. And our as to the approval process, we've grown so much that it would really be cumbersome to continue on that way, in my opinion. But you know, we have a big service structure, and of course they debate that thing all the time as to how to approve stuff and everything like that. So, but I believe that there will come a time when the fellowship won't necessarily have to review it entirely for its approval. We submitted an idea last year to make approval literature available from our World Service Office for cost, and let the groups and the members read it as approval literature for a year, and then if they liked it, they could vote on to approve it or disapprove it, and in that way kind of get around all that, because that was time consuming. I mean, it's hard to explain. I know when I was involved in it, my phone bills ran $300 a month up every month. And it's hard to explain, what went into that approval process.
Greg, do you see any need to change the approval process? Or I guess what I'm asking is that really all that necessary?
Well, I think in the final approval stages, if we are part of our traditions, tell us that for our fellowship, for our group purpose, there's but one ultimate authority: loving God as He may express Himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants; they do not govern. And in accordance with that, any decision that affects the fellowship the way a book will affect the fellowship needs to be a decision of the fellowship. I think that the streamlining that Paige is talking about may come in a lot of the preliminary steps. I think some of the newer material that is in the process now is evidence of this, that rather than having a work written by the fellowship at large, that probably works coming up will be written by smaller segments of the fellowship. That the book Living Clean that Paige referred to was written by a local fellowship. And I think we'll see more of that rather than a fellowship-wide writing effort. But I think final approval of a book will pretty much remain the same in the hands of the fellowship at large through our representative system. I think that materials will become available and get out to the fellowship and be in use and be subsequently approved to be official NA literature per se. But I think that the changes that we're going to see in the procedure are going to be more so in the developmental procedure, in the compiling, the editorial procedure, rather than the approval procedure per se.
So we'll be on the front end rather
That's
than...
my opinion. I think that's what I think.
Though you said something when you introduced yourself that I'd like to return to briefly if we could. You came and helped start an NA group in Atlanta in 1971 that folded for lack of literature. And
Well, we had the version of the white book with the green cover, but I mean, and we read it and tried to follow it, but we only had one copy. It was just, and who can say, maybe it just wasn't time yet back then. I wish it had been time for me. It had saved me 3 years, fooling around. And I felt something in the room, but I mean, you can't have it. I don't know. That's just, you can't play God, but that was a big factor. And it just always jumped out at me. Like I was up in Carsville last night. There's going to be a new meeting up there. Except instead of starting one, they're going to start two. And they're going to have books instead of not having books. And I got no doubt that there's going to be NA in Carsville. It's like a tool or equipment, a way to carry the message we never had before. And the members supportive of that up there and the non-members supportive of that up there can now read a copy of the book and they got some idea what we're talking about. CNA's simple. We just don't use, we stay clean, we go to meetings, we help others, we learn to ask for help ourselves. We get over our ego problems, basically. But, Lord, it takes a lot of talking. A lot of meetings. And it's hard to pin us down to make us, get a clear statement out of us because there's all these qualifications. We're talking about life and human beings. How do you be, somebody works in the studio like this? How do you be a doctor? How do you be a nurse? Sum that up. It's just, you can't get a simple answer sometimes out of a complex question. But, I think the thing about approval processes is the spirit of the thing and the feeling and part of the NA promise is that, you know, there were no big shots in the NA, or little shots, one shot, and we're all shot. And about as quick as one of us puts ourselves on a pedestal and imagines that we're the final answer, the all, then we'll fall on our face. Best we can do is surrender and keep going and try to tend to the obvious things that are right in front of us.
Excuse me, I think we may have an incoming phone call.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have a question. How do you know when you're truly addicted and it's not just a kind of a casual thing with you? How do you know when you're addicted?
Okay, I'd like to let the one of the NA members respond to that, and we're getting close on airtime. We might not be able to answer you completely while you're on the air, but if you will stay on the line, one of these folks will be glad to talk to you. But I'm going to let them begin to answer that question. Who'd like to respond to that?
I can start out. We used to have a saying around, and if you think you might have a problem with drugs, if you think you might be an addict, you probably are. Because I think that the measure of it is, if our definition of an addict starting out is a man or woman whose life is controlled by drugs. And one thing that's very typical of addicts is their lives show a lot of wreckage. Problems in their lives. The drugs are causing a problem, or using drugs seems to be causing a problem. It can be minor for some people, it can be major for others. I think the way to tell whether or not you're an addict, see, I can't say if someone is an addict or not. This is for us, it's a decision that only we can make.
One of these folks will be more than happy to talk to you as soon as we're off the air, but we really have to close out the show right now. So if you'll just hang on, we'll talk to you after it's over. Narcotics Anonymous is a proven program of recovery with over 95 meetings in the metropolitan Atlanta area and over 150 meetings in the state of Georgia. If you have a problem with any chemical or think you may have a problem, why don't you call the Narcotics Anonymous number? It's listed in the phone directory in most of the local communities in Georgia. I'd like to thank the NA community in Atlanta for allowing me an opportunity to be a part of this series of programs. It's been a privilege and I really appreciate it. Once more, let me thank you for watching us. We will see you next week.